Hi, I'm Nick from Marmalade. In this video I'm going to show you how to build, test and deploy your first ever Marmalade application, starting from scratch and ending with an app running on a device. In this video we're going to build a basic Hello World project from scratch using Marmalade. I'm going to build on a Windows PC and I'm going to build and run on both desktop and a BlackBerry 10 device. Afterwards I'm then going to do the same thing on a Mac just to show you the different workflow on a Mac. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a project. We'll have a folder, call it Hello World. And I'm going to create a Marmalade project file. So I could be using our Launchpad tool to do this, but I'm going to go from scratch just basically to show you the different file formats and how everything fits together. So we have helloworld.mkb. I'll open this with a text editor. And what a MKB file is basically it gives you a definition of all the different things like files and resources and so on. So I'm going to add some source code. And I'm going to use a sub-project here called IWGX. So IWGX is basically some Marmalade middleware that makes low-level rendering operations nice and easy. So it does things like screen colors and 2D and 3D graphics, printing, debugging, that kind of stuff. All we're going to use it for is writing some text. So I'll also make the source file we're going to use. And then open the project. So I've set up Marmalade to use Visual Studio 2010 by default through the Marmalade config utility. Basically, when I open that project, it creates a Visual Studio project for me and imports all the things I need. So for example, we've got the Marmalade abstraction layer here, everything like camera, compass, clipboard, device, debug, and so on, extensions if we want to use them, and then up here Marmalade Studio. So this includes our GX layer that we've imported and some other dependencies that it uses. You can see our project file here, and then our CPP file with no contents in it yet. So I'm going to add some code, keep it nice and simple. I'm going to import the IWGX header. There we go. And we're going to have a main loop. So Marmalade uses a kind of pretty standard main loop paradigm. I'll add my code into this main loop here. First thing I'm going to do is going to go IWGX init, just to start off this GX middleware, and at the end, to be nice, we'll terminate it. Return 0. So nothing too fancy here. And then I'm going to set a clear color at the start. So we'll just clear the color to, let's say, blue. So RGB value. With some alpha, which will leave as 0, I think. Leave as 1 even, so we can see it. And then we're going to add a loop in which we draw to the screen. So if we didn't have this, it would just fall out and quit the app straight away. This function here basically checks if we've been told to close the app. So that will basically return true as soon as either, say, the user presses a built-in close button from the OS, or the OS tries to kill us because the OS is running out of memory and so on. So let's just make sure we're doing the thing that the OS wants. In our loop, we'll start by clearing the color of the screen. So we'll do IWGX clear to clear the contents of the buffer. And then we'll print our string. So IWGX print string. This is pretty self-explanatory. The position we'll put it in, X and Y, some text. And then pretty similar to if you're using something like raw OpenGL, you've got to flush the contents to the buffer. And then swap the back and front buffers to display that to the screen. And then finally, a little interesting Marmalade specific thing, we've got this S3 device yield function. Basically this just makes sure that the app gives up enough time to the OS to do things the OS might want to do. So on a lot of platforms this won't really do anything, but if the platform needs to, at this point here it can do things like make sure the OS does background tasking, make sure the OS has the ability to interrupt the app and so on. So it's good to call this once every loop just to make sure that everything will perform as you expect. With all of that done there, I can now build and run the app. So up the top here we have a menu for picking the different device configurations. So this is basically for the architecture. So at the bottom here we have x86, which is for Intel desktop machines, but also you can do x86 builds for Android now. And we have GCC and RBCT ARM compilers for both ARM and MIPS. So ARM is what most devices like an Android, iPhone, BlackBerry device will use, but there are also Android MIPS devices and MIPS devices for TV. So for the desktop, I'm just going to do an x86 debug build. The debug and release builds, basically debug has tracing and assertions and so on, and runs a bit slower but lets you debug more easily, and the release builds are the ones you want to use to test performance and to make builds for the store. So if I hit run, it's going to compile it with the x86 compiler. And then it'll launch it in the Marmalade Simulator. So the Marmalade Simulator just lets you simulate different devices on the desktop. You can see our blue color, hello world text, nothing too exciting. From the configuration menu, you can set things like accelerometer, so you want to play with the accelerometer in a game when your desktop doesn't have a tilt control. You can do that there. You can do things like set up pretend locations and so on. A simple thing you can see in this app is I can just change the surface. So if I just want to switch to some Android device like an 800 by 400, I can do that. And also, because I'm running a debug build here, I can step through it, so I can put breakpoints in and hit them, like this one here, step through the code, and so on. So now I'll build it for device. If I switch here to GCC ARM, we'll do an ARM release build for the BlackBerry 10 device. If I hit build this time, if you pick a GCC ARM release build on Windows, by default it launches the deploy tool. So you see the Marmalade deploy tool here. I can pick ARM GCC release as my platform from there. You can set up configuration, so you could have things like a demo build, you could have different versions for different asset types, you can make this as complicated as you want. By default, for a deployment with Marmalade, you don't actually need to set anything, so it'll build you an app that will install and run on a device without you having to know what any of the options do. But if you want, you can configure it as much as you want. So we'll pick a platform first, we'll do BlackBerry 10. Here you can set things like asset names and versioning and so on. Same for BlackBerry, you could have things like a BlackBerry specific icon. All we want to do basically is set the author info. So if you've watched the setting up for BlackBerry video, you'll know that you need to have an author ID and an author name in order to put test builds on devices. So I'm going to use my Marmalade one. And I can never remember what the author ID is, so I've saved it to a text file on my desktop somewhere. That's the one. So drop this in here. One thing you can also do is you can just save those into your MKB, so you don't have to type them in every time. And that should now install the device. So the only other thing you need to do is to put the device IP address. I've connected by USB. My complicated password. Pick package and install. Hit run. It'll connect by USB and push the app straight to the device. And if you want to see what's going on, you can hit the log button here and get some information so you can see if it's including different assets and so on. And there we go, all built. We now have our first Marmalade application running on device. For more examples and how to deploy to other devices, check out the SDK documentation.